All right, today we're going to break down some pretty startling analysis from the legendary investor Ray Dalio. He's been looking at the powerful forces shaping our world, and, well, his conclusions are frankly pretty alarming.
You know, if you feel like prices are always going up, political arguments are getting way more intense, and the world just feels unstable, you're definitely not alone. Well, Ray Dalio thinks he knows why, and he says it's all part of a predictable pattern that's happened over and over again in history. So let's just get right to his most shocking prediction. According to all of Dalio's research, he believes there is a 40% chance of a second American Civil War. And not in some distant future, but within the next 5 to 10 years.
And it doesn't stop there. He gives the exact same odds, 40%, for World War III breaking out in that same time frame. Now, look, these aren't just wild guesses. This is coming from a guy who runs one of the biggest hedge funds on the entire planet.
So the big question is, right, how on earth does he get to those numbers? This isn't just a feeling he has. It's all based on a specific historical model that he's been building for decades. At the very heart of his thinking is this idea he calls the big cycle. Essentially, it's a 6-stage pattern that he's identified by studying the rise and fall of every major empire throughout history.
Okay, so here's how the cycle works. It always starts with a big economic boom. That boom then inflates into a huge financial bubble. And, you know, bubbles always pop. That leads to a crisis, a bust, and then a recession. But it's these next 2 stages where he says we are right now. Stage 5. That's a period of really intense internal conflict, fighting over money and values. And he argues this stage almost always leads to the final one, revolution or war.
And yeah, here's the kicker. Dalio believes the United States is squarely, right now, in stage 5. That's the stage of severe internal conflict that comes right before a potential collapse or a major war.
So what does this stage 5 conflict actually look like on the ground? Well, Dalio points to some really specific, and he says dangerous cracks that are forming inside American society.
He says the key political dynamic right now is the rise of populism, and that's happening on both the left and the right. As you can see here, it's basically a style of politics where you claim to be fighting for the ordinary person against some corrupt, selfish elite.
And this slide really nails the core issue. The populist message is all about, I am going to fight for you. And in that worldview, compromise, that's seen as a betrayal. It's the complete opposite of the more traditional way of doing things, which is all about finding common ground to make the whole system work. Dalio's point is that this total rejection of compromise is what's making this moment so incredibly dangerous.
So this is the crucial takeaway. Dalio's warning that when winning for your side becomes more important than actually preserving the rules of the game, you know, the democratic system itself, then that whole system is at risk of falling apart.
Now, all this fighting on the inside has huge consequences on the outside. Dalio's model shows that as a nation basically tears itself apart, it gets really weak on the world stage. All that chaos creates the perfect opening for rival countries to challenge the dominant power. To figure out how healthy an empire is, he basically has a 3-point checklist. First, is the country spending way more than it earns, piling up massive debt? Second, are its own people fighting each other instead of working together? And third, is there another powerful country rising up to challenge it? Well, in Dalio's view, the United States today gets a big, dangerous yes on all 3 of those questions, especially with China and Russia on the rise. And all that debt leads to one of his most famous sayings, cash is trash. See, when a government pays for all its spending by just printing more and more money, it pretty much always leads to high inflation, which just crushes the value of the dollars in your wallet.
Now, if this all sounds a bit theoretical, Dalio is quick to say, hey, we have seen this movie before. He draws a really powerful and honestly pretty sobering parallel to one of the darkest times in modern history.
Just look at the 1930s. The Great Depression created unbelievable economic pain and social anger. And in that kind of crisis environment, democracies turned out to be really fragile. Germany, Italy, Spain, Japan. They all gave up on democracy and fell to authoritarian militaristic regimes. Dalio sees this as a huge historical warning sign for what can happen in stage 5.
And to show you this isn't just ancient history, he points to a really disturbing statistic about today. A significant number of Americans, we're talking 10 to 15% of partisans, actually wish death upon people in the other political party. I mean, that is a level of hatred that goes so far beyond just disagreeing on policy.
Okay, so that brings us right up to what's happening in the world today.
Dalio doesn't see the war in Ukraine as some isolated thing. He sees it as a massive accelerator, basically pushing all of these dangerous trends into overdrive.
He says there are three key things we all need to be watching. First, what actually happens in the war itself? Second, how effective are economic sanctions, which are really America's main weapon now? And third, how is the world splitting into two competing camps, one led by the US and the other by a China-Russia alliance?
And this is maybe his most chilling historical parallel. Right before Japan attacked Pearl Harbor in 1941, the United States hit them with incredibly harsh economic sanctions, cutting off their oil. That economic warfare was the direct lead-up to actual military warfare.
Which leaves us with one last, unavoidable question that just hangs over all of this. As the world gets deeper into the biggest economic conflict we've seen since World War II, are we just watching history play out again? Could today's economic weapons really be the trigger for tomorrow's war?